Okay, so we're going to do a quick update. If you guys were watching some of the first videos I was making, I was focusing on the Wyckoff accumulation. And I've stepped away from doing that because I've been trying to focus on this current breakout that we're experiencing in the Bitcoin price and in the traditional markets. So quickly, I just want to recap this Wyckoff method and tell you guys where we're at. So we had this parabolic cycle in 2017, 2018, followed by an altcoin cycle that came a little later. We're just going to focus on Bitcoin right now. But after we see this parabolic phase, we go through this PS, then down to an SC, AR, automatic rally, and then down to a ST test, which if you see the levels, matches up before we had this SC. It's basically to test this level as support. Then we come up for a test, which basically looks like a retest of this PS level, and then the spring. So here's where we've been since March. Now, as you guys know, since March, we've had a collapse in the markets and we've been heavily affected economically by the C word. So let's just zoom in a little bit and see where we're at on the shorter time. We had the spring, which is in this March area, and then we automatically went back up to test previous levels. Once we got around there and got rejected, we entered a consolidation range, which went from about 10,100 all the way down to as low as 8,500. We traded sideways in that area for quite a while until things got a little bit too tight, and then we bounced back up. This area is called the test, and this was a fake out breakout. Now, why do I say that? Because the levels that we got to were further down than the automatic rally level. So the tops, as you can see on my crosshair, we did break through some of the levels, but a majority of it, if I was to lay it on top of, if you look at this range right here, the majority of the peaks of these blue lines were coming up below, and we couldn't actually break through that range. Now, in my opinion, I believe that when we break through the range of this automatic rally, meaning that we close daily candles above 13,000, that's when we can say that we're in this SOS phase. Now, the SOS phase can go as high as 16,000, and I would say 16,000 is about as high as we'll get for the SOS, unless we just enter a parabolic bull market. I don't think we're quite there yet, but I'll break it down a little bit more, explain why this red dotted line is so important. So the red dotted line is the elections. Now, the phase I believe that we're currently in is the LPS phase. And to give you guys a little bit of a visual of this whole process, I'm going to zoom out quickly to this area where you can see the entire trading range, and I'm going to show you guys comparatively to the Wyckoff cycle. So here we have a small dip and a parabolic run, and I'm going to zoom in to compare these charts so you can see that this Wyckoff chart that I'm starting with is after the parabolic phase where it starts to crash violently down from its all-time high. So here we are, assuming that A was the correction from the all-time high when Bitcoin was at 20,000. It comes down to the PS phase, and we came down to the PS phase, and that's not as low as we'll go. We will actually correct more and come down to this SC phase, and as you can see here, we came down to the SC phase. Then we have this automatic rally after the SC phase, which is basically a violent jump back up. It's almost seeming like a parabolic bull market, but it isn't because we're not back to the all-time highs that we were experiencing before. We crash down and enter this ST, which in a Wyckoff cycle in a market could happen 2 to 3 times, basically lower tests that are coming down close to as low as this SC phase, but not quite. And then we have the spring. Now, this spring phase that we enter could be lower than the SC phase. In our situation, it wasn't, because this Wyckoff accumulation cycle is probably 8 to 10 years, and it's for traditional markets whilst we're looking at the Bitcoin price. So they are different, but just to give us somewhat of a visual, we could use this chart. Now, after the spring phase, we start entering this D section. And to make it short and sweet, after the E section, we basically enter a new bull market, and then we restart and enter back at A, where we come crashing down. So where I believe we are in the cycle is right here, this LPS. This little dot right here is the test phase that we just experienced, and we came up, failed, and then we came down. And now we're in this LPS phase. So we came up after the spring, and then we came down. And lately, we've started to actually break out. Why we can call it a breakout is because we've actually broken out of a symmetrical triangle we were forming, which was right here. So we started to actually break out of this range a couple days ago, and since then, we've been maintaining above it. Now, I'm going to explain a scenario that we could be experiencing, but first I want to quickly recap where we are in the market. We have a very strong dollar today, and I do want to get into why the DXY is so critical, but quickly pay attention to this white line. So here we had the COVID crash, and the reason why the spike up happened in the US dollar index is because all the traditional markets came crashing down. So take note of how on March 19th, we're at highs in the DXY, but on March 19th, we are at abysmal lows in the market. So if I hide all these, you can see. This is March 19th. This is the S&P 500, March 19th area, NASDAQ, March 19th area. Dollar index, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. So the dollar pumping means that stocks dump, and crypto typically follows when the stocks dump, and the inverse reaction happens. So there's a trend line that I formed from the peak. It came down. It was drawn after this level when we saw this harsh rejection, and then I've been following it ever since. And I did have this red line drawn because I noticed that there was something weird with how it followed perfectly down, and then when it got rejected enough times trying to break through this red line, we violently came down. And as you can see, if I remove these drawing tools, this is a crazy downward spiral. Like, this is pretty awful. But now I'm seeing something happening where if I zoom in here, if we can just focus on this trading channel where you see the dotted line, dotted line, dotted line, the yellow dotted line in the center is the heart line, we are seeing that when we got rejected at the top of this level, it was very similar to this big white trend line that I formed. So what do I think is happening right now? We violently crashed through this trading channel, this parallel channel, which basically makes this channel somewhat unimportant. But the reason why I'm keeping this on my charts is because I want to see how it treats this level as basically new resistance. And if it will come up and keep failing every time it reaches the bottom of the previous parallel channel, we will see continued downside. So what has been going on lately in the traditional markets? As we can see, here we have the Dow Jones. March crash, we can call this the spring. Up here is the test. And we are far away from having this SOS area. This SOS area will come when we break above the February levels of around 29.5. Okay? So a couple days ago, we looked pretty incredible. We were pumping up, and we almost broke through the previous highs that we were setting for the year. Now this is considered, I guess, a lower high, and we're cooling off. Let's look at the S&P, very similar. The S&P is already at all-time highs when you compare it to where it's at for February, and we're cooling off. Now, what we need to see for the end of the week, and what we need to see moving into the elections, in my opinion, I will switch to the weekly chart, is I would like to see us stay between these two blue lines. If we can trade between these two blue lines before the elections, I think we will see a new all-time high very soon. We don't have any trading range for the traditional markets at these levels. We just had an all-time high and then we crashed down violently. So I have essentially two predictions here, not necessarily predictions, but I have two outcomes. Either we are going to have a double bottom before the elections, which means that we will come down because we got rejected at this previous all-time high. We will come down and touch back at this level, which is about 6.5% away. Or we will come down to this blue line, bounce up, and then continue onwards. This could very well happen very slowly until we reach the elections. Or we can crash down violently, or we could bounce violently. Honestly, the reason why all this stuff is on the table is because of the elections and also because of stimulus. Now, if they pass stimulus and they release news in 10 minutes, this candle will crush. It will pop up very, very fast. And this double bottom idea will probably not happen. We can just call that the bottom. And how will this affect Bitcoin? How will it affect Bitcoin if we do see this double bottom concept come into play before the elections? Meaning that we just slowly taper down or violently crash down because of uncertainty in the markets. What will happen with the dollar is the dollar will get back towards that 94.50 level, meaning it will break through and re-enter this channel, and then it will probably get rejected around the top of this channel leading into the elections, which is possible. I mean, we have enough time to make this all happen. And what that will cause in the Bitcoin price, in my opinion, is it will just come down to this white line and we will keep going onwards. Why do I feel like Bitcoin will only crash back to this this white line? People think that there's this possibility of Bitcoin breaking all the way down to 9,000 again. And I don't want to completely disregard that theory, but the reason why I don't believe that is because if anyone's been paying attention to Bitcoin in these last couple of weeks, there's been terrible news that's come out. There's been news of Donald Trump getting the C word. There's been talks of new pharmaceuticals that are apparently going to be used for the C word. There's been talks about no stimulus, Donald not wanting to pass stimulus, then the next day saying that he wants to. I mean, it's just every single day there's been something. There's been exchanges getting hacked. There's been a new investment from a high-level investment hedge fund. There's just so much stuff going on. And the reason why this is so important to think about is how the volatility in Bitcoin has essentially diminished. Whilst all this crazy news that's so negative has come out, Bitcoin has barely wanted to break 10,000 and it hasn't even broke 10,000 and closed the day below 10,000. The only times you see the price go below 10,000 was with these wicks. And since then, it's been following the same trend line. It was treating it as resistance when it broke below on this COVID crash, became support after it broke through, pumped up when it got very, very low volatility, and then came back down, and I would like to call this just a double bottom. It's obviously not a textbook double bottom, but we could just go ahead and assume that for a second. If this theory plays out, I'm sort of getting to the point where, excuse me, even if they didn't talk about passing stimulus, that I don't believe will break through this line. I very well think this might be the last time back here that you could have got a $10,000 Bitcoin. I'm willing to say I'm wrong here, but this is the final thing I want to talk about in this video of why I do not think I'm wrong. These are our moving averages. Now what I'm seeing here is the yellow line is our 8 daily moving average and the white line is our 55. Like I've mentioned in videos going back, I do not use the 9 and the 50 because those are not Fibonacci numbers. I like using Fibonacci numbers. And 8 is close enough to 9 and 55 is close enough to 50. So it's not even that big of a deal. But anyways, now that we have that out of the way. Whenever this yellow line is above the white line, we are on a bullish trajectory. Now, the moment when we cross above the white line with the yellow line, we typically see a huge spike. So as we can see right here, we are seeing the yellow cross above the white. Came up a little too fast. The reason I know that is because of the RSI, but that'll be for separate videos. So when we broke down below it, the reason this even happened, the whole reason this moment even happened was because of the C word crash. That did not need to happen. That was an orchestrated collapse. And anyone who wants to deny that just doesn't know anything about these markets and they don't know anything about the plans behind the scenes. But it is what it is. When we broke through and had this cross here of the yellow going above the 55, again, we became extremely bullish. And since then, we've maintained above this white trend line. So the markets crashed to their lows for cryptos on Friday the 13th, March 13th. And in literally a month and a couple weeks, we have been bullish since. We got to those highs in, let's see how many days, from the 13th back to testing the highs in 81 days. We literally were back in the trading range we were in February in less than 2 months. Now, if that doesn't tell you that this is all staged, this was all to pump the price before the crash, then to do a crash on purpose to buy the dip, trust me, it was. This was all calculated. Anyways, what happened here, we crossed above the white, meaning the yellow line, the 8 weekly moving average crossed above the 55. We were extremely bullish, and here, uncertainty. Right here was all uncertainty. We crashed below. And I believe that the area over here is the same thing as over here. It's the same moment. And I think this parabolic move upwards will look very similar soon. I'm guessing that we will have this big green candle that we saw on July 27th. I believe we'll see it by October 26th. So that'll be next 2 Mondays from now. Or it could happen this Monday. I don't know. If it happened this Monday, it would look so similar to this in terms of the way that this all occurred, the way that this cross happened. From the day of the cross, we had 1, 2, 3 trading days. So now we're at 1, 2, 3, 4 trading days. And the only reason I do not, the only reason we aren't seeing this huge green pump, in my opinion, is obviously 1 is volume. And number 2 is because the dollar is pumping today. The dollar is above its 8 daily moving average. But now I'll bring in some other moving averages. And I think we'll see resistance right here at this 13-week moving average, the weekly moving average. It hasn't been maintaining above this 13 weekly moving average for long. So that's my indicator. Now, if it rejects off of this again, it'll be significantly below this moving average for a very extended period of time, for 20 weeks. So that's my indicator for the long term. I believe that if we break above this 13 week, then we're bullish as long as we're closing above it. As you can see here, when we broke above it, we came down violently the next week. And if we go to the daily, it's because, in my opinion, this trend line, this white line, it's a major resistance. We're breaking above that white line today, but that could be corrected back by tomorrow. If we're closing multiple green candles above this white line, then I'll change my opinion and I'll say that the rest of this month is just going to suck for the markets until the elections. And yeah, that's basically where we're at. I think that we are bullish still in the short term. You guys understand where I'm at with everything, but just to zoom out and give an idea of what's going on here for our Bitcoin price. We are headed towards the spring. We are headed towards the SOS phase. And typically what will happen is we will do this thing called crossing the creek, which will be we will continue sideways until we touch back at this regression line naturally, this white line, which could happen before the elections, or we can just run into it naturally, having a really slow, arduous sideways movement. And then I believe we will pump up and have our SOS before the new year. That is my call, my prediction. We will have a $15,000 to $16,000 Bitcoin before the new year. And I'll leave it at that. See you guys in the next video.